The shooting range filled with laughter as Staff Sergeant Evelyn Jackson reached for the M24 sniper rifle. At 32 years old, with her auburn hair secured in a regulation bun and steady green eyes that never faltered, she had experienced countless variations of this ridicule throughout her entire military service. One recruit suggested with barely concealed amusement that perhaps she should try something with less weight, noting that the M24 had substantial recoil that could easily knock her down. His companions snickered as they observed the woman they presumed was merely another support personnel pretending to be a marksman. What they remained unaware of, and what they were soon to discover in a most humbling fashion when the base commander entered through that entrance, was that Evelyn Jackson possessed every long-distance shooting record on the installation, had accumulated 47 confirmed eliminations across 3 combat tours, and served as the sniper instructor who had prepared half the Special Operations Forces. As she methodically loaded a round and readied herself to demonstrate to these recruits what genuine marksmanship entailed, she remained oblivious to the fact that their commanding officer was about to make an appearance that would transform the derision into the most enlightening experience of their military lives. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Jackson had served as a sniper for 11 years, though she had learned through experience that entering a shooting range in standard fatigues meant people typically began with zero assumptions about her capabilities. She refrained from displaying her instructor qualifications or announcing her accomplishments, simply arriving to perform her duties, which on this particular day involved assessing the newest group of recruits who believed they possessed knowledge about long-distance shooting. The range supervisor, a young sergeant named Martinez who had recently transferred to the installation, had provided her with the evaluation forms, explaining that they had 12 recruits claiming proficiency as marksmen, some displaying considerable arrogance about their abilities, and they required proper assessment before advancing to specialized instruction. Evelyn had acknowledged this and proceeded toward the firing position where 12 recruits stood assembled, all male, all in their early 20s, all exhibiting the self-assured demeanor of soldiers who had qualified with rifles during basic instruction and believed that achievement made them snipers. When she lifted the M24 sniper rifle from the equipment storage to illustrate proper handling techniques, the mockery commenced without delay. One recruit called out, questioning whether she could manage such a weapon, a muscular young man with a Texas accent whose uniform identified him as Cooper, explaining that precision weapons require significant upper body strength and recoil control. Another recruit, smaller in stature but equally self-assured, added his opinion that she should perhaps remain with the M4, noting that the M24 possessed a 7-pound trigger pull requiring considerable finger strength. Evelyn maintained her composure, her expression revealing nothing as she had experienced this precise scenario numerous times previously. She thanked them for their concern and indicated she believed she could handle it. She proceeded to inspect the weapon with practiced efficiency, examining the barrel, verifying the bolt mechanism, checking the scope attachment, with every action demonstrating precision and professionalism that revealed a familiarity that should have prompted them to reconsider their assumptions. However, Recruit Cooper persisted, seriously suggesting without intending offense that the rifle likely possessed more combat experience than she did, and perhaps one of them should demonstrate proper technique instead. His companions found this amusing while Martinez, serving as range supervisor, appeared uncomfortable but chose not to intervene, being outranked and likely assuming the sergeant could manage some recruit commentary. Evelyn completed her inspection and faced the group, reciting the technical specifications of the M24 sniper weapon system, explaining it fired 7.62 by 51 mm NATO ammunition with an effective distance of 800 meters, the rifle weighed 12.1 pounds when loaded, the trigger pull measured 7 pounds, and the scope was a Leupold Mark IV with 10 times magnification, then asking if anyone disputed those specifications. The recruits exchanged uncertain glances as she clearly possessed the technical knowledge, but Cooper refused to relent, acknowledging that theoretical knowledge was valuable but actually firing this weapon under real conditions differed significantly, requiring experience most support personnel lacked. The implication was unmistakable as he believed she was support staff, likely administrative, definitely not an actual shooter. Evelyn decided to address this situation as she consistently did, allowing the rifle to communicate for her. She proposed an arrangement, stating she would demonstrate with the M24, then each of them would attempt identical shots, and they would determine who possessed greater actual experience, asking if that seemed fair. Cooper smiled with confidence, questioning what the challenge entailed. She explained 3 shots at 300 meters, 600 meters, and 800 meters, different targets under different conditions following the standard qualification course, and when they outperformed her, though Evelyn smiled in a manner that should have alerted them they had made a terrible miscalculation, she would recommend all of them for advanced sniper instruction immediately, but when she outperformed them, they would traverse the obstacle course in complete gear twice. The recruits agreed without hesitation, completely confident in their capabilities and completely ignorant of whom they were challenging. Evelyn positioned herself at the firing line as the first target stood at 300 meters, a standard distance for infantry marksmen. She settled into shooting position, regulated her breathing, and fired with the shot achieving perfection, striking dead center of the target. The recruits remained unimpressed as 300 meters fell within their qualification distance and they believed they could achieve that as well. Cooper muttered that it was fortunate, though with diminished confidence. The second target was positioned at 600 meters, beyond standard infantry qualification into the territory of designated marksmen and snipers, with wind increasing to approximately 8 meters per hour from the east, which would influence bullet trajectory. Evelyn made a minor scope adjustment, accounting for wind deviation and bullet descent, then fired another perfect center strike. The recruits had grown quieter as 600 meters with wind compensation wasn't fortune, that represented skill. The third target was located at 800 meters, the extreme effective distance of the M24, a shot requiring expert-level comprehension of ballistics, environmental elements, and rifle capabilities. Evelyn took her time, observing wind indicators downrange, calculating the necessary compensation for bullet drop, and adjusting her breathing to the natural respiratory pause where her body achieved maximum stability. She fired as the spotting scope confirmed what she already knew, another perfect center strike at 800 meters. The range had become completely silent with 12 recruits who had been laughing minutes earlier now staring at 3 targets, all displaying perfect center strikes at increasing distances under varying conditions. Cooper found his voice first, acknowledging that represented professional sniper-level shooting, to which Evelyn simply agreed that it was, then asking who wanted to attempt it first. Throughout the following hour, all 12 recruits attempted the identical 3 shots with the best among them, ironically Cooper, managing to strike the 300-meter target center and approach accuracy on the 600-meter shot but missing the 800-meter target completely. Most couldn't achieve consistent strikes at 600 meters. As they completed their attempts, appearing dejected and facing the promised double obstacle course traverse, the range entrance opened as Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Blake entered, the base commander possessing a no-nonsense demeanor with 25 years of service and a reputation for demanding excellence. Accompanying him was a 3-star general that Evelyn immediately recognized as General Robert Morrison, who commanded all sniper instruction programs for the United States Army. The recruits immediately assumed attention positions while Martinez appeared nervous, unaware that senior officers were arriving. Colonel Blake instructed them to relax, then addressed Evelyn, noting she was conducting the new recruit assessment. She confirmed that she had just completed the qualification shoot. General Morrison approached the spotting scope, examining the targets, his eyebrows rising as he observed the 3 perfect strikes at 300, 600, and 800 meters, then questioning whose shots these were. Evelyn replied they were hers as Morrison looked at the recruits, then back at Evelyn, then at the targets again, a small smile crossing his features. He asked whether these gentlemen knew against whom they had been competing. The recruits appeared confused as Cooper spoke up, explaining they were simply completing their qualification assessment with the sergeant. Morrison corrected him, emphasizing with Sergeant Jackson, then asking if she had introduced herself appropriately. They responded that she had merely stated she was conducting their evaluation. Morrison asked Evelyn if these young men seemed unaware of her identity and whether she minded if he provided some background information. Evelyn shrugged slightly, indicating it was his decision. Morrison addressed the recruits directly, explaining he would tell them about Staff Sergeant Evelyn Jackson. She possessed every long-distance shooting record on this installation, some of which had remained unbroken for over 8 years. She had accumulated 47 confirmed eliminations across 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. She was qualified as a Special Operations Sniper Instructor, meaning she had trained Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Delta Force operators. She had won the International Sniper Competition twice, defeating shooters from 15 different nations, including some who had been snipers since before her birth. He paused to allow that information to register, then continued that the most important thing they needed to understand about Sergeant Jackson was that she was the finest sniper he had ever commanded in his 30 years of military service, with her understanding of ballistics, environmental factors, and marksmanship fundamentals reaching a level most shooters never achieve, and they had just mocked her for lifting an M24. The recruit's expressions had transformed from confused to mortified as Cooper appeared to wish the ground would swallow him. Morrison wasn't finished, explaining he had come to this installation specifically to observe Sergeant Jackson's instruction methods because they were updating the entire Army sniper curriculum based on her techniques. The reason half their special operations snipers were as effective as they were was because she had trained them or trained their trainers, so when they suggested she should allow one of them to demonstrate proper technique, they were essentially telling one of the world's finest marksmen that she should learn from basic infantry recruits. The silence was profound as even Martinez appeared stunned, having no comprehension of Evelyn's actual identity. Colonel Blake added that Sergeant Jackson didn't advertise her credentials as she believed shooters should prove themselves through performance rather than reputation, but he thought today's demonstration had made her capabilities quite clear. Evelyn remained at ease, her expression neutral, not deriving pleasure from their embarrassment but not sympathizing with it either, as this was an instructional moment and they needed to learn. General Morrison turned to her, explaining he was present because they needed to discuss her next assignment, but first he wanted to see her conduct these recruits through the advanced course to show them what genuine sniper training entailed. She confirmed she would be pleased to do that. Morrison addressed the recruits, explaining they were about to receive world-class instruction from one of the finest in the world, and he suggested they pay attention, adding that the obstacle course punishment could wait as this was more important. Throughout the next 3 hours, Evelyn conducted a masterclass in long-distance shooting, explaining the physics of bullet trajectory, the effects of temperature and humidity on ballistics, the proper breathing techniques for stable shooting, and the mental discipline required for precision marksmanship. The recruits, chastened by their earlier mockery, paid attention with an intensity they had probably never demonstrated before, watching her shoot, studying her techniques, and beginning to comprehend the massive gap between basic marksmanship and true sniper-level precision. She demonstrated shots they had thought impossible, striking targets at 1,000 meters, adjusting for crosswinds that changed mid-flight, compensating for elevation differences and even the Coriolis effect on extreme distance shots. Cooper, who had been the most vocal mocker, asked a question during a break, addressing Sergeant Jackson and questioning how she had become this skilled, explaining he had been shooting since age 12 and was nowhere near her level. Evelyn considered the question seriously, explaining that experience mattered, but it wasn't merely time. It was deliberate practice focused on understanding every variable affecting the shot. Most shooters practice until they can strike the target, while professional snipers practice until they can strike the exact same point on the target repeatedly under any conditions, which requires understanding physics, meteorology, and ballistics at a level most people don't pursue. She continued that there was something else more important than technical knowledge, which was the mindset, explaining that when people underestimate you because you're female or young or don't fit their image of what a sniper should be, you have two choices: to become angry and defensive, or use it as motivation to be so undeniably excellent that their assumptions become irrelevant, and she had chosen the second option. Another recruit asked whether she still encountered people who didn't take her seriously even with her record, to which Evelyn replied honestly that it happened all the time, that she entered ranges or training facilities regularly where people assumed she was administrative staff or perhaps a decent hobbyist shooter. It used to frustrate her, but now she viewed it as an opportunity to teach a lesson about judging capability based on performance rather than appearance. General Morrison, who had been observing the training, spoke up, explaining that was exactly why they were updating the curriculum based on Sergeant Jackson's approach, as she taught shooters to focus on measurable performance like grouping size, consistency under various conditions, and effectiveness at range instead of subjective assessments based on strength, size, or gender, and her students outperformed traditionally trained snipers because they learned the fundamentals so thoroughly that physical differences became irrelevant. By the session's conclusion, the recruits had developed a completely different understanding of marksmanship and a profound respect for the quiet sergeant they had mocked hours earlier. As they prepared to depart, Cooper approached Evelyn, stating he owed her an apology, acknowledging that the things he had said earlier about her not being able to handle the M24 and about not having experience were completely out of line, that she was the most skilled shooter he had ever seen, and he was sorry he had judged her based on foolish assumptions. Evelyn nodded, accepting the apology and advising him to use this as a learning experience, explaining that in the military and in life, people will constantly make assumptions about your capabilities based on how you look, where you're from, or who they think you should be, and to prove them wrong through performance, letting your results speak louder than their assumptions. The other recruits echoed Cooper's apology as they had learned a difficult lesson about respect, capability, and the danger of underestimating people based on appearance. After they departed to complete their promised obstacle course, as Morrison had decided they still needed that reminder, the general asked Evelyn to join him and Colonel Blake in the briefing room. Morrison began by explaining that her demonstration today reminded him why he had come, stating they needed her at Fort Benning as the lead instructor for the new advanced sniper training program, where she would be training not just Army snipers but cross-service students from Marines, Navy, and Air Force, essentially shaping the future of military marksmanship. Evelyn felt both honored and hesitant, explaining that she appreciated the opportunity but should mention she had received similar offers before and there was always institutional resistance, with some senior instructors disliking the idea of a female lead instructor and some students arriving with the same attitudes those recruits had displayed today, making it exhausting to constantly prove yourself to people who should be focused on learning. Morrison leaned forward, acknowledging he wouldn't mislead her, that she was correct. There would be resistance, there would be students and instructors requiring attitude adjustments, but that was exactly why they needed her in this position, as the students who were professional enough to focus on learning would receive world-class instruction while those who weren't would either adapt or fail, and either outcome improved the force. Colonel Blake added that Evelyn had been proving herself for 11 years and at some point the burden shouldn't be on her to justify her position but should be on others to meet her standards, and this assignment placed her in a position to establish those standards force-wide. Evelyn considered this as they were correct. She had spent her entire career proving herself to skeptics, and taking this position meant she could shape training in a way that focused on capability over demographics, on performance over assumptions. She agreed to do it but on one condition, asking what that was, explaining that every student who arrived with the attitude that females couldn't shoot, that size determined capability, or that marksmanship was about strength rather than skill would receive the exact same treatment those recruits received today. She would demonstrate, they would attempt, and when they failed, they would learn the lesson properly. Morrison smiled, stating he wouldn't have it any other way. 3 months later, Evelyn was at Fort Benning standing before her first class of advanced sniper students, a class of 30 including Army, Marines, Navy SEALs, and Air Force personnel, all experienced marksmen who had been selected for advanced training. As she introduced herself, she could observe the familiar expressions, some respectful, some curious, and yes, some skeptical, with a Marine Staff Sergeant in the front row barely suppressing a smirk. Evelyn decided to address it directly, stating she could see some had questions about their instructor and she would save them all time, confirming yes she was their lead instructor, yes she was female, yes she was probably smaller than most of them, and no that didn't affect her ability to teach them to be better snipers, then asking for any questions. The Marine raised his hand, stating without disrespect that most of them had significant combat experience and questioning what made her qualified to teach them. It was a fair question professionally asked, so Evelyn gave a professional answer, explaining she had 11 years as a sniper, 3 combat deployments, 47 confirmed eliminations, multiple competition victories including international championships, and had trained over 200 special operations snipers, but credentials didn't matter as much as results, so the arrangement was that at the end of this course they would shoot better than they did now or the training had failed, and to judge her by their improvement rather than her resume. She paused, then added that if anyone had concerns about female instructors, small-statured shooters, or any other demographic issues, they should voice them now because once training started, the only thing that mattered was performance, both hers and theirs. No one spoke up as the Marine nodded, seemingly satisfied. Throughout the next 12 weeks, Evelyn pushed the class harder than they had ever been pushed, teaching them advanced ballistics, environmental compensation techniques, shooting positions they had never considered, and mental discipline that separated good shooters from exceptional ones. She also demonstrated every single technique herself, not just explaining but showing, and when she taught extreme range shooting, she struck targets at 1500 meters, when she taught shooting from unstable positions, she made impossible shots while perched on vehicle hoods or leaning around barriers, and when she taught quick target acquisition, she engaged multiple targets faster than students thought possible. The skeptics became believers, the believers became exceptional shooters, and the entire class learned that capability had nothing to do with size, gender, or strength but was about knowledge, practice, and mental discipline. The Marine Staff Sergeant who had questioned her credentials approached her in week 10, stating he needed to say something, that when the course started he had doubts, having never had a female instructor for anything combat related and wasn't sure how effective it would be, and he was wrong, that she was the best instructor he had ever had, better than his scout sniper instructors, better than the civilian competition shooters he had trained with, that she had made him a significantly better shooter and more importantly had changed how he thought about marksmanship. Evelyn thanked him and appreciated his honesty, explaining that the fact he had doubts but stayed professional and focused on learning was exactly the right approach, and to use this experience when back with his unit, to judge Marines by their performance rather than assumptions, as that would build a better force. By the course's conclusion, all 30 students had improved dramatically with their average effective range increasing by 200 meters, their consistency improving by 40%, and their understanding of ballistics and environmental factors reaching levels that usually took years to develop. General Morrison attended the graduation, observing the final qualification shoots, and as he watched Evelyn's students perform, demonstrating skills that exceeded traditional sniper training outcomes, he pulled her aside, explaining that he had been watching military marksmanship training for 3 decades and this class was performing at a level he had rarely seen, that she had proven her methods worked across all service branches and all experience levels, then questioning how she accomplished it. Evelyn thought carefully before answering, explaining that she taught fundamentals so thoroughly that physical advantages became irrelevant, that a 6'4" muscular male and a 5'6" female should shoot identically if they both understood ballistics, environmental factors, and proper technique, as the rifle didn't care about the shooter's size and only responded to proper fundamentals. She continued that there was something else, that she taught students that limitations were often mental rather than physical, and when someone tells you that you can't shoot at extreme range because you're not strong enough to handle recoil or you can't be consistent because you're too small to stabilize the rifle, those are excuses rather than facts, and once students understood that, They stopped limiting themselves based on what they thought they couldn't do and started achieving what was actually possible. Morrison nodded, explaining that mindset shift was exactly what they needed force-wide, and he was promoting her to Sergeant First Class effective immediately and assigning her to develop the new Army-wide sniper curriculum where she would be establishing standards for all military marksmanship training. Throughout the following years, Evelyn's curriculum became the standard across all services, with her emphasis on fundamentals over physical attributes, on measurable performance over subjective assessment, creating a generation of snipers who were more effective than ever before. She continued teaching, continued demonstrating, and continued proving that the best shooter in any room might be the person everyone underestimated based on appearance. 5 years after that day on the range with the mocking recruits, Evelyn was recognized as the Master Sniper Instructor for the United States military, the highest position in marksmanship training, having trained over 1,000 snipers, influenced curriculum used by 15 allied nations, and fundamentally changed how the military approached precision shooting. At a ceremony honoring her achievements, General Morrison, now a 4-star general, spoke about her impact, explaining that Sergeant First Class Evelyn Jackson had revolutionized military marksmanship training, that her students consistently outperformed traditionally trained snipers, her techniques had been adopted by Allied forces worldwide, but her greatest contribution wasn't technical but cultural, as she had proven that excellence in any military specialty had nothing to do with demographics and everything to do with knowledge, practice, and determination. He turned to Evelyn directly, stating she had spent her career being underestimated and then proving the doubters wrong, that every time someone assumed she couldn't handle a rifle she responded by outperforming them, every time someone questioned her credentials she let her results speak for her, and she had taught an entire generation of snipers to do the same, to ignore limitations others tried to impose and to achieve excellence through fundamentals and discipline. After the ceremony, a young female lieutenant approached Evelyn, explaining she was headed to sniper training the following month as the first female in her battalion selected for the school, and some people had been discouraging, saying women couldn't handle the physical demands and that she would fail, then questioning how Evelyn dealt with that. Evelyn smiled, recognizing herself in the young officer, advising her to use their doubt as motivation, not to become angry but to get better, to focus so intensely on mastering fundamentals that their assumptions became irrelevant, and to remember that when she succeeded, and she would succeed if she did the work, she wasn't just proving herself but making it easier for the next woman and the next until eventually gender stopped being a factor anyone considered. She continued, explaining that those recruits who mocked her on the range 11 years ago had learned a valuable lesson that day, that some of them were instructors now and they taught their students to judge capability by performance rather than appearance, and that ripple effect of changing one mind at a time through undeniable competence was how you created lasting change. The lieutenant left with renewed determination, and Evelyn knew she would succeed because that's what happened when talented people refused to accept limitations others tried to impose. They achieved excellence and inspired others to do the same. 10 years after that day on the range, Evelyn Jackson returned to the same installation as a guest speaker for a new class of recruits, among them 3 women, which was unheard of a decade earlier when she had been the only female shooter most soldiers had ever encountered. As she walked onto the familiar range, now wearing the rank of Master Sergeant and carrying credentials that filled an entire page, she noticed something had fundamentally changed as the recruits, male and female alike, stood at attention with respect that had nothing to do with her gender and everything to do with her reputation. The senior instructor, a grizzled sergeant major, introduced her, explaining to the recruits that this was Master Sergeant Evelyn Jackson, that she held records some of them would spend entire careers trying to break, that she had trained operators they had only heard about in legends, and she was there to teach them that the only limitations that mattered were the ones they accepted. Evelyn picked up an M24 from the rack, the same model that had started everything, and turned to face the recruits, seeing something in their eyes that hadn't been there a decade ago, pure professional respect uncomplicated by assumptions. She explained that this rifle didn't care who was holding it, didn't know your gender, your size, your background, or your doubts, and only responded to proper fundamentals, disciplined practice, and refusal to accept limitations others tried to impose. She chambered around with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times, explaining that today she was going to show them what was possible when you stopped listening to people who told you what you couldn't do and started focusing on mastering what you could, and then they were going to do the same, because that was how they build not just better shooters but a better force. The shot that followed, a perfect strike at 1,000 meters in variable wind, wasn't just a demonstration but a promise that excellence was available to anyone willing to do the work regardless of who said it was impossible, because Evelyn Jackson had proven shot by shot over a distinguished career that the best sniper in any room might be the person everyone underestimated right up until the moment they pulled the trigger and proved everyone wrong.